This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Mazur and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is Craig Bullock, Isha Das. Craig Bullock, or Isha Das, is an accomplished teacher, writer, lecturer, practicing psychotherapist, and spiritual director of the Assisi Institute in Rochester, New York. A former pastoral administrator at the Church of Saints Peter and Paul in Rochester, Isha Das earned graduate degrees in religious studies from the University of Notre and clinical psychology from the University of Duquesne. His education includes extensive study in psychology, spirituality, mysticism, world religions, and yoga. He counts Richard Rohr among his lifelong friends and mentors. Isha Das was made a minister and official Kriya Yoga teacher by Roy Eugene Davis, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. His latest book is Open Wider the Door, the integration of Kriya Yoga and mystical Christianity.
Welcome, everyone. Today's broadcast is brought to you by two wonderful eating disorder nonprofits, the Emilee Connection and KMB for Answers, formed in memory of Emilee Mazur and Katie Bennett, two exceptional young women who lost their lives to anorexia. We have a fantastic show for you today. Craig Bullock is a wonderful spiritual human who wears many hats, and he will be with us in just a minute. But first, I'd like to welcome my husband, my best friend, and my soulmate, Jack Mazur.
Oh, it's so great to be here again today, and thank you, listeners, for being here with us.
Unfortunately, Ellen can't be with us today, but she will be back with us for the next episode. But I'm going to lead with my quote for today, and my quote is, "The spiritual life is not a life before, after, or beyond our everyday existence. No, the spiritual life can only be real when it is lived in the midst of pains and joys of the here and now." And that's by Henry Nouwen. What do you think?
Wow. Boy. Yeah, you hate to maybe have people have those pains in their life, but I think it makes us people a better person and more
compassionate,
empathetic to other people, and through our journey, it's made me. Emilee has made me a better person with her.
Yes, we've grown.
Yes,
and we continue to grow.
Yes.
And now I'd like to welcome our dear friend, Craig Bullock. Welcome.
I am so happy to be with the two of you and just pleased and looking forward to this conversation, however it unfolds.
You've listened to our podcast before, obviously. Okay, Craig. So Jack and I know you through your wonderful wife and therapist, Vicki Campanaro, and the Assisi Institute. And I have a head start here today because I read your first book, which I absolutely loved. And it's titled Extravagant Love, Reflections of a Catholic Yogi. And I read that a few years ago. Your personal journey can't help but inspire all who read it. Can you give us an overview of your early life and your challenges growing up?
Sure. And I will try to do it in a Reader's Digest version. I was born here in Rochester, New York. I was born into a Catholic family. I attended Catholic grammar school. When I was 12, my mother passed away, and that was really the beginning of a lot of chaos in my life. My father, God bless his soul, was a pretty severe alcoholic. And so by the time I was 15 or so, I had dropped out of high school. I was living for a period of time on the streets, living with friends. My life was truly a mess. And one Sunday morning, I was just inspired. I hadn't been to church in years to go to Mass. And I prayed. It was at St. Peter's and Paul's here in Rochester. And I remember just offering up a prayer, like, if you're real, then I just need some help. And as I left the church, a priest that I had known from grammar school approached me and said, he greeted me, and then he said he wanted me to attend a retreat for teenagers. Now, it was a very tough neighborhood, and my persona was to be big and tough. And so I said to him, Father, I'm not going on any retreat. But then I remembered this prayer that I had just uttered in church, and I thought, okay, maybe there's a connection. So to make a long story short, I went on the retreat, and it was right around my 16th birthday, and I had a profound spiritual awakening. I didn't know how else to say it. I had a moment there where God's presence, I try not to tear up when I talk about it, God's presence just came to me in the form of pure love. And so I just said yes. And through a lot of ups and downs, I've continued to say yes. But that is the beginning of really what was a transformational experience for me. And it really launched me on the life that I'm living now.
That's beautiful.
So what were some of your challenges growing up?
Challenges. Well, navigating the loss of my mother, living with an alcoholic father. I was the youngest by 7 years. I was the only one still at home. There's the chaos of that. And then as I got into my early 20s, I realized, maybe mid-20s really, that there were wounds and scars from my childhood that I couldn't just merely pray them away. And don't misunderstand me. Prayer and meditation are a big part of my life and my sanity. But I realized that I had wounds and hurts that I had to begin to deal with. And so some of the challenges were just facing some of the wounds, facing some of the hurts, and learning how to integrate them in such a way that my life could serve the highest good of myself, but everybody that I knew and loved. So there was that challenge of healing the wounds. Mm-hmm. That's why I like the quote you have from Nouwen at the very beginning, that if we can't integrate our wounds and our hurts and the painful side of life into a spiritual perspective, then our spirituality is not very useful, because we all have wounds and we're all going to be hurt sooner or later in one way. So if we can't integrate, again, our hurts and our wounds into a faith perspective in a healthy way, then our faith perspective, I don't think, is very helpful or valuable.
So going forward now into your adult life, in your 20s, you went to Notre Dame.
Yes.
Right? And was that college life at Notre Dame what one would consider a, typical college life for you?
Well, I only went there for graduate school. So when you're in a graduate school, you don't have the same experience that you have in an undergraduate school. However, having said that, it really was a wonderful experience. Notre Dame, it's not the theology there and the spirituality is not limited. It's not closed. It's not constricted. And so it really opened my mind and my heart to a broader perspective around spirituality and around the concept of God. So I look back at my time there with just wonderful memories, and it really launched me, again, my mind and my heart, and a broader approach to life and to spirituality.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk. There was I think Father Kalin talked to us too from Spiritus Christi about the survey that's been done now, and people, the leading religion is now none.
Yes.
Not N-U-N, but
yes.
N-O-N-E.
Yes.
Right.
When on a form, what religion do you practice? None is an option.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how is, because I remember growing up as a kid in Oswego, and every Saturday afternoon going up 4:00 to confession, and, going to Mass every Sunday morning, and did that through my whole childhood. And, did that through college. When I was in Albany doing that. So why has this happened?
Well, I'll give you a little story. There was a German theologian, Karl Rahner, who was very influential at the Second Vatican Council. And at the end of the Second Vatican Council, he gave a speech. And he said, in our Catholic tradition, there is a wonderful storehouse of contemplative and mystical spirituality. And he said, if we don't open it up and share it and give it to the world, we're going to lose members. And I think that was a little bit of exaggeration here, but perhaps not. I think that was prophetic. Mm-hmm. I think what has happened in the Catholic Church is there is this storehouse of mystical and contemplative wisdom, whether we're talking about Teresa of Avila, Thomas Merton, so on and so forth. But we haven't done, the Catholic Church, I'll say, hasn't done a good job of breaking that open. And particularly in today's culture, young people, I think specifically, are looking for something they can grab onto, something that they can experience. Going back to, again, Henry Nouwen's quote, something that they can integrate that will sustain them and nourish them in their daily struggles and all the complexities of modern life. And I think the challenge or the problem with mainline religion is it's become very propositional. Do you believe in this statement of faith or not? And I'm not saying that doesn't have some relevance, but it's also very limited. And if the modern church, if it can't bring people into an actual experience of the divine beyond just these propositional statements, then it's going to continue to lose people. People are hungry for a direct experience of the divine. And again, how to integrate that, particularly with their day-to-day struggles.
Yeah. I think I read where Richard Rohr, and one of the things I read about, he talks about orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. It's orthodoxy generally refers to, does one align themselves with all of these propositional statements of belief, all the dogmatic statements of belief? And again, it tends to stop there, and it becomes propositional. It's like a mental construct that you buy into, but it has no energy in your life. Orthopraxis is to bring the truths as living truths into your life and then to live them. There's a line by Jesus. He said, not everybody who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of God, but only those that do the will of my Father. So my translation of that, if we can bring the love of God and the truth of God into our life so that it's a living and dynamic force, then we're going to be stuck just on the orthodoxy, and it won't translate into orthopraxy, into living it, having it becoming a living, dynamic force in your lives.
Yeah. Yeah, as opposed to just going through the motions of,
yes.
Walking through the doors
yes.
of church and sitting there for an hour every Sunday or Saturday or
yes.
whatever.
Well, let me put it this way. It's relatively easy, let's just say, to follow the Ten Commandments. It's relatively easy. And if we stop there, that religion is just fulfilling the law, the minimal requirements of the law, it's easy, but it's not life-giving. When we begin to see that whatever God is love, and the heart and soul of healthy religion and healthy spirituality is love, well, love makes demands on us that the law can't make. And I don't mean demands in a negative sense. When you love somebody, before we began this podcast, we were talking about our experiences of being married and so forth. When you love somebody, if you're really loving them, it draws everything out of you, the negative and the good. It places demands on you that otherwise the law or just outward religion doesn't place on you. Love calls for everything, and it gives everything. That's the wonderful mystery of it. Yes, it demands everything. If you read the words of Jesus, they're demanding. Love God with your whole mind, your whole heart, your whole being. but then that opens the door to receive all that God wants to give you. So orthodoxy has a place, but it's limited, where love, which is the heart of the gospel, demands everything, but it gives everything.
Yeah, The Chosen,
yes.
How it's just exploded in
Yes.
people's lives, and it's, everybody has watched 3 seasons and waiting
Yes.
for this 4th season, and I think, watching that versus the old Charlton Heston
Yes.
versions of it's brought it into a modern day text.
Yes.
And I think it connects with so many more people now.
Well, almost every episode that my wife Vicki and I watch that, we end up crying.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Us too.
Yeah, us too. Yeah.
Yeah, because it makes Jesus real. And I know, they go beyond some of the literal, limited gospel stories in terms of the lives of the apostles, but you see their humanness too, and how it's all integrated into what I call the divine life, into God's love. And again, if we can't integrate our humanness and every aspect of our humanness into the divine life, into God's love, then our religion is going to be wanting, and it's going to lose people.
Right, right.
And what a difference it made in that actor's life.
Yes.
Because he was 20 years, he was an actor and was struggling to survive,
Yes.
financially. And then all of a sudden, here comes this role and just changed his life and changed his whole spiritual.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so well done.
Oh my gosh.
So well done. Yeah. So I have a question that Ellen wanted to ask you, and she wants to know more about mystical Christianity. Mystical Christianity. She said that was a phrase she wasn't familiar with, and she asked if you could explain that, and also more about what inspired you to to write your latest book, Open Wider the Door, and of course, the subtitle of that book, The Integration of Kriya Yoga and Mystical Christianity.
All right, so we'll start with mystical Christianity. Let me just say what mystical Christianity is not, or what mysticism in general is not, because there's a lot of confusion about it. It is not necessarily having fantastic experiences. I mean, sometimes fantastic experiences come, but they go. So it's not about ESP and things like that per se. We'll just go back to the words of Jesus. He said, the kingdom of God is neither here nor there. It is within you. So that the seed of God as a dynamic, life-giving presence is really, it's in the depths of everybody's soul. And so when we talk about mystical Christianity, what we're talking about is again, maybe going with our theme today, moving from just theological statements to the actual experience of God's presence within you and around you. It's something that you taste. It's something that you feel. It's something that you experience. It's an encounter it's a direct encounter, and there's so many dimensions to the encounter and possibilities, but it's a direct encounter with God within you and around you and with other people. Teresa of Avila, the great Catholic mystic, said, the goal is to experience yourself in God and God in yourself. So it's that encounter with love, it's that encounter with grace, and you're encountering love and grace and the divine presence because it elevates you. It helps you to be the best possible version of yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect, but it grows you towards the best version of yourself. And it becomes a context for one's life. Again, the two of you know this as well or better than I do, that life is painful. Painful things will happen to all of us. Tragedy in some form will happen to all of us sooner or later. As I like to say, none of us are going to get out of this life alive. Mm. But if you have a background of this larger presence, the beingness of God, it doesn't take away or protect us from the tragedy in a literal way, but it gives us the strength and the grace to traverse through the tragedies with dignity, with faith, with hope, with wisdom, with intelligence, with love. So mysticism is nurturing this direct experience of the divine, and then allowing that direct experience is not just meant to be a private experience. Then you begin to experience the presence of the divine in other people, in the circumstances of your life. Think of Francis of Assisi, my favorite Catholic saint. He wrote that beautiful canticle, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, where he literally experienced the divine presence in everything and everyone. It wasn't just a Hallmark greeting. It wasn't just a pithy saying. He literally, so that when he encountered a leper, he felt like he was encountering Christ in that leper. There's even a story with his friars where they're walking down the road and there was a worm crossing the road and he made them stop. And they said, "Why are we stopping?" He said, "Well, we're going to wait for Brother Worm to cross the road because he was here first." Mm-hmm. So it's the direct mysticism is that direct experience of God. It begins within yourself, but then it extends to everyone and everything, where you have this intuition of the oneness of creation and God's presence permeating everything and everyone.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful explanation.
Yeah.
I love that.
Lindy would have stopped for the worm too, because she always she catches a fly in the house, she lets them back out. So.
Yes.
Spiders, they let out.
Spiders out, yeah. It's God's creatures.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know how many people personally know somebody like you who is a Catholic yogi.
Okay.
I wonder how many of you there are.
Well, I think the number's growing, number one.
I love it.
Number two, let me just say a little bit how it came together in me. So I'll go back to this experience I had when I was 16, very powerful experience of God's presence. The problem was I didn't know how to stabilize that. It would come and it would go, and I always thought it was sort of up to the whim of God. If God wanted to bless me with a sense of God's presence today, I would have it. If not, I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And as I talked about getting into my mid-20s and late 20s, dealing with some of my hurts from the past and my wounds, I realized that in order to do that in a healthy way, I had to, in some ways, stabilize my spiritual experiences. They had to become part of my everyday life. And I knew if I perhaps joined a Catholic monastery that I might get there, but I was married, I had kids, I couldn't join a Catholic monastery. So somebody gave me a copy of the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi. It was written by Paramahansa Yogananda. He came to the United States in 1920, died in 52. And it's really, it's a story of his experience and a mystical experience through a yogic lens. And I read that and I was very intrigued, actually fell in love with the book and everything he said. And what drew me into Kriya Yoga specifically, that's the meditation technique that he teaches, is he said, I didn't come to make Christians Hindus. I came just to help everybody stabilize this ever-deepening experience of God. And this is how you do it, not as a monk, but as somebody living in the world. And he was also very devoted to Christ. It was very interesting. He had a deep devotion to Francis of Assisi. So it was like a hand in a glove for me. So I started practicing it, and I just felt from day one my calling in life in some way, shape, or form was to bring East and West together. Because, the world is becoming smaller and smaller, and if we don't recognize both our common humanity but also our common spirituality, we're not gonna do very well. We're not going to survive. So I think what we're doing is part of a kind of, I'd like to think, a prophetic kind of movement where you don't give up your traditions, you don't surrender them per se, but you learn to recognize that at some level the mystics of Christianity, the mystics of Buddhism and Hinduism, for example, we're all drinking from the same well. Mm-hmm. one of the things that struck me was I'm a fan of Teresa of Avila, who one of the foremost mystics in the Catholic Church, and she talked about these different stages of spiritual realization, and they were everything that Yogananda said, framed a little differently in a Western context. So what we try to do with the Assisi Institute is bring East and West together and just provide a place for people, regardless of their backgrounds. We have a lot of Catholics that come, former Catholics. We have people from a Jewish background, so on and so forth, just to provide an environment where they can learn about mystical and contemplative spirituality and learn how to nurture it in their lives. So we're not trying to convert anyone to anything, but just in the context of who they are and their life's trajectory, to help them to go deeper into their own souls and discover that treasure that has always been within them.
Okay, that's beautifully said. Can you tell us, well, first of all the links for today's show will be in the show notes, but it would be nice if you could tell us about the 3 books that you've written, which are wonderful, and also some of the things the Assisi Institute offers and where you're located.
Okay.
And what year did the Assisi Institute start?
My wife and I started it in approximately 2003.
Okay.
We started out on a Thursday night with 2 or 3 people, and Vicki and myself. And I want to really underscore that Vicki and I are one pillar together holding up the Assisi Institute. Now, there are other people that are developing and growing, so we have many pillars. But as I like to say, I am the bluster and she's the luster. So we started on a Thursday night. There was, like I said, there was us and 2 of us and maybe 2 or 3 other people. And now we own a 22,000 square foot building, and we have a growing community. And one of the things that happened good that came out of COVID is our virtual imprint has really grown. We have people taking our courses that live in Australia, California, South America. But I'll get back to the books. I'll stress 2 books, the most recent 2, and the third one that's coming.
Oh, great.
All right, so the first book is Reflections of a Catholic Yogi, and that's really autobiographical. I wanted to tell my story, and particularly how and why I brought these 2 different streams together of Christianity and Kriya Yoga, and to just say that one of my favorite lines from Francis of Assisi, he said, if God can work through me, he can work through anyone. And if God can show up in my life with all of my limitations, he can show up in anybody's life. So I wanted to make that clear. It's for ordinary people, everyday people.
And it's a beautifully written book.
Oh, thank you.
And it's honestly written. And I think those things will make it providential for anybody who reads it.
You're kind of, I'll tell you a funny story. Richard Rohr wrote a little blurb for it. And when he read it, he called me. He said, "You sure you want to say all those things in the book?" And I said, "Absolutely." The second book was really my attempt at a little bit more of a, when I say theoretical, I don't mean that in a dry sense, but in a theoretical level, to say what Kriya Yoga is and what mystical Christianity is and how the 2 really are taking people to the same end. So I go through what Kriya Yoga is, certain meditation techniques, how they relate to the teachings of Christ. So it's really my way. It's a good book for people that are interested in learning about Kriya Yoga and mystical Christianity, want to know how to meditate, what the lifestyle looks like. So I wrote it with that in mind. The third book, the next book coming out, hopefully it'll be out by the fall. It's the life of Francis of Assisi, but it's not the typical. There's a million books about the life of Francis. It's not quite that. The title is going to be The Hero's Journey Through the Life of Francis of Assisi. And so I think what we're lacking in our culture are true heroes and what the hero's path is. And again, every religion, every solid mythology has a map of the hero's journey and what it looks like and the blessings of the hero's journey. And so I'm using the life of Francis as a model for the hero's journey. Like, what is the heroic life like? We're all called to live, actually, heroic life. That doesn't mean we're going to do things that are going to put us on the front page of any newspaper or anything like that. Choosing to be parents in this day and age, if you do it right, is a heroic life. What the two of you are doing, in terms of what's happened after your daughter's death, is a heroic life. A good life, a life of true meaning and depth, is a heroic life. And so I use Francis's life as the map, as the structure of what it looks like.
I love that.
Yes.
And I love his connection with animals, and especially birds. They've become very significant to us.
Yeah. Vicki and I were married in Assisi, Italy.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. In fact, I'll be there in 2 weeks.
I would love to go back to Italy. And we went once, but we never got to experience Assisi, and I feel badly about that. I would love to go back.
Well, let me say this. This will kind of energize us to do this. Vicki and I used to take people on pilgrimages to Assisi. We haven't done it in half a dozen years, but a couple of people who I really love and have never been there want to go. So maybe Vicki and I in the next year will organize something, and we'll do it around your schedule if you're interested in going.
Oh my goodness. That would be a miracle, because
That might get me on a plane again. I'm not.
I would, I'm game.
My wife Vicki has wonderful techniques for people that actually have flying phobias.
Well, I never did, but it's not a phobia. I guess I'm just with all the chaos, I guess, of flights now today. But
well, let me this is just a footnote, but it's related. What happens to all of us as we get older, I'll bring in a little yoga psychology, the vata element, the air element, begins to become stronger and stronger. And so we all get a little bit more anxious than as we get older. I drive like an old man now, they tell me. I never did when I was younger. Anyways,
yeah.
We all tend to get a little bit more anxious. I won't get into all the metaphysical reasons why, but it kind of comes with the aging process a little bit.
But we're getting better, right?
Yes, but we're getting better. We're getting better.
Yeah.
You couldn't pay me to go back and be 40 again.
No.
Yes.
And as we drive like old people now in the first lane and watch everybody going by in the second and third lane at 80 miles an hour, and it's crazy.
Yes,
absolutely crazy. So, as we talk about spirituality and versus religion, and I think all people with mental illnesses and going through the journey of recovery, they need that spiritual
the component yeah.
To there's a lot of therapy going on and stuff, and
that's important.
It's important, and medication sometimes is important, but I think we're finding people are reaching for that spiritual connection. And when you talked about the East and the West, we're seeing more people in eating disorders where yoga therapy and meditation is so important to them, because it brings that calm and that peace that they can't get out of their, they can't.
Yes.
Their head has just got so many things going on, and so much shame and stigma, somebody, and a lot of that's put on themselves by people who don't understand.
Yeah.
But it's the stillness,
Yeah.
It's the stillness, and to being able to quiet that mind, and that does take connection to God or higher
absolutely.
power, for sure.
Yeah, let me say it this way, that without a reference to something bigger than ourselves, when we are in pain, then the pain is going to feel much larger. So that if we begin a spiritual practice, we're part of a spiritual community, we're meditating, so on and so forth, you begin to, it may be just a sense of peace at first, it may be a sense of stillness, but you begin to, it's like your consciousness and your heart begins to expand. It doesn't make the pain go away necessarily, but it gives one a bigger context to hold the pain. Something that Richard Rohr said to me many years before the internet. I still have the note. We would mail each other cards and letters, and he was at the P.S. at the end of the letter. There were two things. The first thing he always told me, he said, trust yourself. But then the second thing he said was, carry your wounds gracefully.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Poetic, too.
Yeah.
Makes me tear up just to repeat it. And that I still to this day think about that once a week, because I still have, there's a wound that still percolates inside of me. And and so part of the trick is, though, you can hold it with that gracefulness when you have a sense of being part of something bigger than yourselves. And part of it is a spiritual community, but part of it is your own connection with the divine. It just allows you to handle that pain with intelligence, with wisdom, with compassion, with grace, and with love.
Yeah. As you know, our daughter Emilee passed away in 2016, and we also lost our therapist. She died just a couple weeks after Emilee passed away. Tragically, she died. And, we asked people for different therapists that were out there, and we got some names, and we went to a couple of them.
We went to one, and we were too much for her to handle.
Yeah, she just didn't understand the depths of our grief and everything. So eventually, and Vicky's name came up. Unfortunately, she was taking new clients at the time, and she has been just a godsend to us. And she's just...
well, the name came up 3 times. And the first time it came up, it came from Kathy, our therapist, who was just wonderful. And she had heard about the Assisi Institute and all the wonderful things you do right here in Rochester. And then the girl, Renee Schultz Jacobson, who helped us with the book, she had mentioned it. And then our goddaughter had moved up here a short time after that, and she had mentioned Vicky's name. And things keep hitting you in the face. And it really was going to be hard to fill Kathy's shoes. And she was absolutely wonderful. But Vicky is a godsend in her own right. And she is absolutely wonderful. She has been such a blessing in our lives. And every bit as wonderful as Kathy in her own way.
Sure.
And it has helped tremendously. To have somebody who's your therapist who also shares a little bit about their own journey is so important too, and they both did that. Go ahead, Jack. This was your question. I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay. No, and again, it was a godsend, and it was no coincidence that these people kept mentioning Vicky's names. There are no coincidences in life. It's God leading us down the paths. So, but you and Vicky, you both offer therapy with that spiritual insight we just talked about. And it's been so cathartic to be able to have a therapist who you can open up to and counsel from that spiritual perspective. Because, the journey that we were on with Emilee, I don't know how we would have gotten through it without having that spiritual connection. And so can you tell us about how that works for people like us that have gone through the journey that we have, and there's so many people. Our story is yet not unique, and I always, with the Emilee connection and people I talk to, everybody's story needs to be told out there because we're not alone. And
everybody's story is unique, but there's so many common threads that we all experience. Yeah.
All right, so 2 thoughts. One, I hope I won't disappoint the 2 of you by this next statement. But Vicky and I have retired formally from our psychotherapy practice.
Oh, okay.
Turning our attention now to just the Assisi Institute, and we have 4 grandchildren, and just where life has brought us. But having said that, let me address what you're saying, and it really touches what I was kind of touched on before, what I stated just a few minutes ago, that if we're isolated in our pain, the pain really becomes unbearable in some way, shape, or form. And first of all, just on a psychological level, if we open up to other people of goodwill, people who are loving and wise, so forth, it just creates a larger container for the pain. And I think taking it to a deeper level, being able to integrate prayer, being able to integrate meditation, conscious contact with God, it really becomes a healing balm for the wound. Again, it doesn't take it all away, but it makes it manageable. And then I'll take this a level deeper, and we talked about this before we began the podcast today. I look at what the two of you have done in with your pain, and there's always two different directions we can go in when tragedy strikes us. We can become bitter, and you can always have a moment of bitterness, but the problem is if people get stuck in their bitterness, then despair sets in, nihilism sets in, and life just becomes a dark journey that you just endure. Or you can do what the two of you have done. You feel the pain, you process the pain, you get help with the pain, but then you turn it into a mission. You turn it into a service and a gift that you give other people. And that's why the term I used for the two of you is you've really become wonderfully wounded healers. And that's part of how the healing unfolds, is that you become a loving resource, a loving support for other people who have gone through what you're going through. And that facilitates your own healing, and the love that goes through you to bless them also blesses you, and it comes back to you. So I think that's another component, is that you learn to be a wounded healer. I mentioned to Linda before, I don't know if you were in the room, Jack, when I did, that an experience I had with Richard many, many years ago when I was in my early 30s. He turned to me and said, "It's a good thing you had the childhood you had." And Richard, I had a horrible childhood. How can you say that? And he said, "I know." He said, "But if you weren't wounded, you'd just be a yuppie making lots of money, contributing nothing to the world. But because you're wounded, you become a wounded healer." So people that have suffered, if they open their hearts to other people, to support, to love, and then bring in the spiritual dimension, what often happens, you become a wounded healer. And that's part of the healing.
That's so beautiful. I never thought of it quite that way before. And it's a passion. I mean, there's nothing that fills you up more than your children, and we're so blessed with Matthew and each other, absolutely, and family. But next to those things, there's nothing that fills us up more than being able to hold that space for somebody else, a safe space for them to share and to grow and to learn together. I think that's beautiful. Thank you. That's beautiful.
Let me just frame it this way. The whole world is chasing after happiness. And what I like to say to people is you can't make happiness the goal. If you make happiness the goal, it's like a dog chasing its tail. You never quite get there, or you don't get there for long. That happiness it's the unintended consequence of a life that is well lived. And a life that is well lived, and this is part of the message of the book with Francis that I've developed, is a life that is in service of something bigger than yourself. Mm-hmm. And again, at one stage in life, that is having kids. And if you're a good parent, you're going to be taken out of yourself. You're going to be serving something bigger than yourself. That kind of life of serving something bigger than yourself, it creates a life rich in meaning and purpose. It gives you something to get out of bed for. And I really think it channels the life of God, the divine life, through us. And then you'll have many moments of joy. Yeah. But they're the unintended consequence of the life that is well lived. One of the most meaningful things we can do, for example, is to mentor another human being and to encourage another human being. And that creates a rich life.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so, so much for joining us. And I want to thank you, Jack, for standing alongside me.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank you, Craig, and your wonderful wife, Vicki. And it does make me very sad that you're not working so much at the therapist part, but I hope you'll still see us and you'll still see us.
Friendship is eternal.
We could do it over dinner. How's that?
Friendship is eternal.
Okay, so thank you, listeners. Our daughters and you are the reason we do this podcast. And a warm thank you to Rockbox Recording and Production and Scott Fitzgerald, sound engineer extraordinaire, for expertly producing our podcast and so much more. Help us continue the conversation. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces on the podcast platform you are listening to us on. Tell your family and friends about us, and check out the show notes to learn more about Craig, his wonderful books, and the Assisi Institute, and also more about Jack, Linda, me, and our nonprofits, and Ellen Bennett and KMB for Answers, who couldn't be here.
And remember, everybody's mental health matters. And please remember that Rockbox is the place to record your podcast, record your audiobook, or do a legacy cast for your loved ones. And again, thank you everybody for being here today and for listening. Until next time.
Hey, Craig, do you have any final words you want to leave us with?
I just want to thank you for this opportunity, and just want you both to know that Vicki and I look at the two of you and what you do with your lives, and you give us inspiration and help us to be more courageous. So thank you.
Right back at you. Thank you.
Okay.